Hello everyone, I'm Maria Taka, and we're going to continue to talk about individual adaptations to selection pressures. And today our lecture is going to be adaptations in the predator-prey interactions context. So predator-prey interactions is an interaction that happens between two trophic levels. Unlike competition that we've discussed in a previous lecture that is happening between individuals of similar trophic levels, here we have energy flow going from one trophic level to another. Predator-prey interactions is one of those interesting ecological interactions because it's an evolutionary arms race, which means predators evolve traits in response to prey and prey evolve traits in response to predators. So it's a form of coevolution. What we must remember is that there's strong selection pressure in this dynamic. And both predators and prey are evolving and expressing traits that increase their fitness. So if we think about predators and prey interacting with each other, this arms race runs continuously, which means we should expect predators getting better and better hunters and prey getting better and better at defending themselves from predators. But how do we have evidence for this? We see it today as predators chasing prey and prey escaping, but how do we know that over evolutionary time that traits have evolved continuously in this coevolutionary fashion? This is a difficult thing to do because it's difficult for us to rewind the evolutionary clock to look at traits in the past. But I want to share with you a very interesting experiment that was published in 2007. The authors of this paper resurrected predators and prey. In other words, they were studying Daphnia and their bacterial parasite, Pasturia. Both Daphnia and their parasite form dormant life stages, which means if you go to lakes that have sediments that have been laid over time, each sedimentary layer has the dormant life stage of both Daphnia and their parasite. And so what these authors did was they took a core of sediments from a lake that went down 39 years, and then they restored both Daphnia and their parasites from each of those years. And the experiment was the following. They resurrected Daphnia and exposed Daphnia at various time periods to either parasites that were in the same sediment layer with them, or parasites from the past, or parasites from the future. And here's what they found. They found that when parasites from the past were allowed to interact with Daphnia from the future, they were less effective at infecting them. This means that the Daphnia of the future had evolved ways to beat past parasites. So when they were exposed to those past parasites, they were already better at defending themselves. The authors also found that parasites from the future were less effective at infecting past Daphnia. This means that the parasites have also evolved adaptations, and those adaptations were specific to their current host populations, which means when Daphnia saw parasites from the future, those future parasites had already moved their evolutionary traits to a new level and were no longer effective against Daphnia of the past. The consequence was that overall, the ability for parasites to infect Daphnia stayed the same. At every generation, parasites were just as effective at infecting Daphnia as they were in the previous generation, because each time both Daphnia was evolving adaptations to fight against the parasites, and parasites were evolving adaptations to get better at infecting them. And so the arms race runs continuously, but no one wins. This means that predator-prey interactions really shape the evolution and expression of traits in all sorts of forms. Predators or parasites have traits that maximize their hunting ability or their infective ability. Prey have traits that minimize the probability of predation or infection if we're talking about parasites. What we should note is that selection, natural selection, is stronger on the prey than the predator. This should make sense because a predator that's unsuccessful in that hunt only loses a meal. But a prey that's unsuccessful loses their life. And that means that we should really focus first on adaptations that prey have evolved. So these are called anti-predator defenses. And there are many categories of traits. Prey can evolve morphological traits to defend themselves, behavioral traits, physiological traits, and life history characters, all to defend themselves against parasites or predators. And the aim of these traits is to increase the survival probability at different stages of the predator-prey interaction. So for example, prey can evolve adaptations before a predator is even encountering them. And they want to do things like decrease the detection by the predator, so just not be found at all. Or they can avoid predators at parts of the landscape at the spatial scale or the temporal scale, avoid activity times of predators. They could evolve traits during an encounter, have escape tactics to make capture itself difficult, or prevent successful killing even though the predator may have already found them. So these anti-predator defenses can come in various forms, and we'll go through a few examples now. So one of the most interesting sets of traits actually evolved to before a predator encounter, because prey that have these traits are aiming to minimize the probability of predators even finding them. And so one of the clearest examples of this is camouflage. What you have here is a picture at the top left corner of an insect on a bark, and the insect is right there. And so camouflage keeps prey safe, or at least minimize the detection of predators onto their prey. Prey can also be quiet or elusive, means harder to find. They can choose safe habitats, or they can remove evidence of actually being in an area. So a lot of prey, in fact, hide signs and signals of their being in an environment. During a predator encounter, prey can also evolve traits to minimize the probability of being killed. They've already been detected by the predator. Now the aim is to not be killed. Aposematic coloration, which is warning colorations, is one of the best examples of traits that evolve for anti-predator defense, because prey that have these bright colors are warning predators that they are not palatable. And so it prevents predators from attacking the prey. Prey also can use behaviors like fleeing or escaping when a predator is encountering them. They can hide, or they can draw the attention of the predator using something like a pursuit deterrent signal. So this picture on the bottom corner of an ungulate that's jumping up high, or called stotting. It's been hypothesized that stotting is a way for the prey to tell the predator that the prey is in good physiological and physical condition and will be able to escape an attack. And so it's not worth it for the predator to actually attack this individual. So that's a pursuit deterrent signal. Prey can also evolve traits like tail autotomy, which will misdirect the attack of the predator onto a body part that's not essential. They can fight back or intimidate, or some prey even pretend to be dead so that it deters the predator from attacking them. Coloration. which you've heard in one of the earlier lectures when we discussed signals, is a really interesting way for which prey can avoid predation. And so warning coloration and mimicry of warning coloration has evolved many times in the natural world. And this is because when prey evolve warning coloration, predators know not to attack, or predators can learn to not attack. And there are two forms of mimicry of warning coloration. One is Mullerian mimicry, where populations of distantly related species converge on warning color patterns. And so the image you see here is of millipedes that are different species that live in a wide geographic area, but they all have these yellow spots, and they're all communicating to the predator their level of toxicity. Same thing with the frogs at the bottom and the butterflies in the middle. They all have similar warning color patterns, even though they're not closely related species. Batesian mimicry is a different form of mimicry, and in this one, non-toxic species evolve similar color patterns as toxic species in the same geographic area. So in this image here, the Sonoran mountain king snake, which also has this red, yellow, and black banding pattern, is a non-venomous species, but its pattern looks similar to the Sonoran coral snake, which is a venomous species. And so the mountain king snake is mimicking the coral snake because the coral snake is venomous, and the expectation here is that predators in that environment, such as birds and mammals, have learned that the coral snake is venomous and shouldn't be attacked. And so the Sonoran mountain king snake can take advantage of that and be the same color and prevent or reduce attacks on itself. So mimicry of warning coloration shows convergence of color patterns because it's an effective anti-predator strategy. We've talked about morphology quite a bit, and that morphological traits can be good ways for prey to stay alive, right? Using colors, for example, or camouflage. But risk of predation influences behavioral decisions in lots of different contexts. So for example, if we think about the foraging lectures that I gave earlier, decisions about when to feed or when to resume feeding or where to feed were all discussed in light of optimal foraging. However, predation risk can influence an individual's decision about whether they feed during the day or night, or how quickly do they come out from hiding after an attack to resume feeding, or where in the landscape to feed, what to eat, and how to handle food. Predation risk can also influence social interactions, like whether individuals form groups and what group structure should that be, and how does an individual spend its time, either between foraging or staying alert and vigilant. So let me first talk about foraging efficiency and the way predation risk influences foraging efficiency. And I want to describe an observation that Stephen Lima made in 1985. He observed that gray squirrels sometimes eat food items where they find it. So they'll find a food item and eat it right there. Or sometimes they take it to cover, which is a tree, before eating it. Now, optimal foraging theory doesn't predict two different outcomes. But the observation looks like this. And so this is a figure from his paper that describes how on the y-axis is frequency, which is the number of times this observation was made, and on the x-axis is distance traveled. So sometimes squirrels eat the food item right where they find it, so they don't travel at all. And other times they travel all the way back to their tree, and very little frequency in between. Right? So these two alternatives needed an explanation. And the authors predicted that predation risk had something to do with it. And so they did this experiment where they provided cookies to gray squirrels in parks. And they manipulated two things. They manipulated the travel time that the squirrel has to make to go to safety, which is a tree. So they would put cookies close to their trees or far from trees. They also manipulated handling time, which is the size of the food, so the size of the cookie. A larger cookie takes longer to eat than a smaller cookie. And they found these results, that squirrels were more likely to carry the cookie to safety before eating it if the tree was close by, which means travel time was short, or if the cookie was too big, that handling time was long. So if they could get to a tree quickly, they would take the cookie to the tree, or if they couldn't eat the cookie right then as fast as they wanted to, they would carry it to the tree and then eat it there. These results suggest one really important thing, that what squirrels are trying to do is minimize their exposure to predators while maximizing their foraging efficiency. So still considering travel time and handling time as important, but also how exposed they are in the environment. This means that prey are actually paying attention to their environment and are being vigilant so that they can escape a predator attack, or at least change their behaviors under risky and non-risky conditions. So we should be able to ask if it's possible to predict when a prey should initiate escape when a predator is approaching. On one hand, you could think that if a predator is approaching a prey, always run away. Yes, but the question is when. So we can think about fleeing or escape from an economic point of view. And so this is called the economics of fleeing. And it's been modeled several times, and the model I'm showing you here is a model of flight initiation distance. Let me explain. In a graph like this, on the x-axis is the distance of the predator from the prey. So on one side, the predator is very close to the prey, and on the other, the predator is far away. So let's think about the benefit of fleeing, or the cost of not fleeing. That relationship should look something like this. When a predator is close to the prey, the benefit of fleeing is very high because it increases the survival probability. Right? Or in other words, the cost of not escaping is very high because you can die. But when a predator is far away from the prey, there's actually very little cost, right? Or very little benefit of fleeing because the danger is far away. So you can expect this relationship, which means somewhere along the distance between the predator and prey, a prey should decide to escape. How do we figure that out? We need another measure. And that measure should consider the cost of actually fleeing. Escaping itself can cost a prey. It can cost them time. When they're escaping, they're using time that they would ordinarily use for something else. It can cost them energy because they have to run or fly or swim away from the predator. And it can cost them in terms of missed opportunities. Right? So for example, if a prey was foraging and then it had to run away from the predator, it's missing its opportunity to forage, or it's missing its opportunity to defend a territory or seek a mate. So there are costs to escaping. And that relationship could look like this, that when the predator is close to the prey, the cost is actually really low, and the benefit of fleeing is very high. But when the predator is far away from the prey, the cost of fleeing is really high because all that time and energy and missed opportunities would be incurred by the prey, but the survival risk is low because the predator is actually not so close, and so it's not so risky to escape. So we can actually use an approach like this to predict the optimal escape distance. And that would be right here. At this point, the costs and benefits equate. And at this distance, a prey should optimally escape from a predator. This is the optimal escape distance from a prey for the predator. So, if we're thinking about escape and vigilance, we should realize that some prey form groups in order to maximize their probability of finding a prey. And so group formation is one of the clearest examples of an anti-predator strategy. The anti-predator benefits of forming groups can come in various forms. One is this idea that the more individuals there are, risk is diluted across individuals. Predators can also be confused by groups, and zebra is an interesting example of this. As you can see here, there is an image of multiple zebra, but which is the beginning of one and where is the beginning of the other is difficult for us and also predators to tell. So when a predator is trying to attack a group like a zebra, it doesn't know where to attack because it looks like one large animal or multiple animals that are difficult to tell apart. Groups can also defend themselves because there are more individuals to fight back. And they can be more vigilant, which is the many eyes hypothesis. Right? If many eyes are paying attention to the environment, they're more likely to see a predator. I will say here in this predation predator lecture that there are other benefits to forming groups that we didn't discuss before. And this is that groups can also have foraging benefits. Groups can be better at finding food, or they can have better hunting success. Let's start with the dilution effect. What is the dilution effect? The dilution effect is just a numerical outcome about being in a larger group. And so in this figure, which is based on an experiment done by Foster and Tern in 1981, they noticed that water skaters are attacked by fish in ponds, and that the number of attacks per individual changed when group size changed. So for example, when individuals are in a single group, every individual is attacked at a really high rate because they're alone. But as group size increases, the probability of attack is divided by the number of individuals in the group. So every individual is less likely to be attacked or has fewer attacks on them because there are more individuals that a fish is attacking. So the dilution effect is a numerical outcome of being in a larger group that reduces everyone's risk. Now, this advantage favors group formation or larger groups to form, but only if larger groups do not attract more predator attention, which is possible. That if there's a large group in the environment, a predator is more likely to see that large group, and so therefore the large group overall faces bigger risk. So dilution wouldn't work in those circumstances. But otherwise, at the basic level, larger groups experience less attacks, or individuals in larger groups experience less attacks than individuals in smaller groups. So in this example, the water skaters are being attacked by fish from below, which means they can't be vigilant and they don't know when attacks are occurring. But actually, in many systems, group size increases the ability for prey to be vigilant. So in this example, goshawks are less successful when they attack larger groups, And the reason that's the case is because larger groups are more vigilant than smaller groups. There are more individuals with paying attention to the environment and looking out for predators. So in this graph, the y-axis is the percent attack success, and the x-axis is the number of pigeons in the flock. So you can see that when there's one pigeon, the goshawk is 80% attack success, has an 80% attack success. But that reduces dramatically when there are many pigeons in the flock, and that's because those many pigeons see the predator sooner and can escape before the predator can attack. This means that prey should know that group sizes is an effective strategy. And so in areas that high risk, group sizes should increase. My own work has shown that when we look at group sizes in zebra form larger groups in areas that lions use. So on the x-axis is a measure of how lions use space. So parts of the environments where lions have low probability of being there, and parts of the environment where lions have high probability of being there. And you'll notice the green line is the group size of zebra. So there are larger groups in areas where there are more lions or more likely to be lions. But they only do this in open habitats, because only in open habitats do zebra have the vigilance advantage, because they can look around in the environment and look for lions. In a closed forest, being in a large group is not advantageous because they can't be vigilant. They can't see through the forest and look for the predator. And so group size doesn't change in closed habitats. It only changes in open habitats. And so prey are aware that group size is an effective anti-predator strategy, but only in areas where it works. This means that when we think about how predators distribute themselves in space and how prey react to it, there's this dynamic between predator-prey movement. And from the perspective of prey, there are two opposing forces. Prey are attracted to resources, as we discussed in our optimal foraging lectures, but they also need to avoid predation, as we're discussing here. So how can they do both? So let's think about a predator-free world. Right? In a predator-free world, prey can have a clear and predictable map of resources, right? Which is what we expect from our optimal foraging or our competition lectures. And in a predator-free world, prey can optimally forage by choosing the habitat that gives them the best resources. But when we add predators to this world, now prey have to track resources, but they also have to track predation risk. Resources may be stable, because if it's food like a plant, then the habitat quality can be determined by the prey. But a predator moves through that landscape. And so the map of predation risk for the prey is harder to keep track of. It's less stable. And so what you'd expect is that prey need to trade off between finding food and keeping safe. And so this is the food safety trade-off. And what we see in many systems is that prey behavior is skewed towards keeping the prey safe rather than optimally foraging. And so in this cartoon here, the zebra moved from the high resource area in dark green to a different part of the landscape has lower food quality because it's avoiding the lion. In a multi-predator world, this becomes even harder because the prey have to track multiple predators, and so needs to create multiple maps of predation risk. And since everyone is moving, that's less predictable, less stable. So can prey do this? Can prey minimize predation risk from all predators on their landscape in order to stay alive? So we propose several possible hypotheses for prey to use when they're trying to minimize predation risk in a landscape of multiple predators. So one strategy is that prey can avoid the most dangerous predators. This means they could avoid the predators that kill them the most, their main predators, more than they avoid predators in the landscape that are less dangerous to them. This hypothesis is called the threat-sensitive hypothesis, that the degree of prey response to predators depends on how dangerous that predator is. Prey could also avoid the most predictable predators. So for example, they could avoid predators that are sit and pursue predators because those anchor themselves on the landscape, and if prey can figure out where that is, they know where to find the predators. That's easier to do than keeping track of a cursorial predator that's moving through the landscape, or a scavenger that also attacks, because both cursorial and scavengers move a lot more in the landscape than a sit and pursue predator. Prey could also not try and keep track of predators, but just avoid risky areas. So for example, they can avoid habitats where the probability of kills are high, or habitats where they can't use vigilance, where it's closed or very densely vegetated. Or they could ignore predation risk and just optimally forage for resources. This is the least likely outcome, of course. And so we tried to understand how prey respond to a landscape of multiple predators, and we wanted to ask if prey can keep track of predation risk and respond. And so this is a study that I conducted in a reserve in South Africa called Karangwe. In this reserve, we knew the locations of all the predators and all the preys, and we had perfect information about everyone's movements. We also knew the density of the vegetation and where the resources were for both the prey and the predators. So the first thing we did was map predation risk. So here are some representative maps of where the lions, the cheetahs, the hyenas, the leopards, and the wild dogs were on the landscape. Spots in red are where those species use the landscape a lot. Spots in blue are places where they use the landscape less. And we created maps like this that tracked where the predators move, where the predators typically kill prey, and which habitats are dangerous for the prey. And then we mapped the space use of prey. And I'll show you just two graphs that describe the outcomes. The smallest prey on this landscape is the impala. And what we found was that impala avoided areas that predators use. So this graph has points that go below values of 1, and those values that are below 1 show the degree of avoidance of that variable. And so impalas avoided areas that lions use a lot, and then avoided areas that leopards use a little less, and then wild dogs and cheetahs. This matches the threat-sensitive hypothesis because lions eat impala more than leopards do, than wild dogs and cheetahs. And so lions are the most dangerous prey for impala. Impala also avoided risky habitats, especially the closed riverine forest, because density of vegetation was high and they cannot use vigilance, and there's a high probability of them being killed in those landscapes. Other species use different strategies. A species like a giraffe, which is very large, avoid the most dangerous predators for them, lions and leopards, but don't avoid cheetahs, wild dogs, and hyenas. Zebra do the same thing. They avoid lions and leopards, which are the most dangerous predators for it, but they don't avoid the other predators on the landscape. These two prey also avoid dangerous habitats, And they do something different, which is select for high resource areas. Which means zebra and giraffe are not just living in a landscape with predation risk as their main driver of space, but they're balancing risk avoidance with resource selection. So let me summarize. Prey and predators are in this continuous arms race, as I began. Natural selection shapes adaptations. So prey can evolve morphology, for example, that are defenses, and predators can evolve morphology that are weapons to make them better, effective killers. Now, predators and prey can also react to the interaction by inducing a response at that moment. And so this could be behavioral escape or physiological stress responses that allow them to run fast, or morphological changes. And so the image you see on the slide right now is an image of a rotifer that has been exposed to predators, and so therefore have evolved, have induced spines, have actually grown these spines during its lifetime. And those spines make it difficult for the predator to eat it. So this is an induced morphological response. Predator-prey interactions can also influence community structure as well as nutrient flow across trophic levels, depending on which predators eat which prey and which prey are able to escape. So I want to end with two things to think about. So far, we've talked about anti-predator strategies for the most part. But I want you to think about what kind of traits that predators have evolved to increase hunting success. I also want you to think about how natural selection for traits that increase survival probability for prey could affect the evolution of other traits. We discussed how predation risk influences foraging, for example. But could predation risk influence sexual selection for traits that influence reproductive success? This is something for you to think about. With that, I end our discussion of adaptations for predator-prey interactions. Thank you.